What happens when the most decorated actress in Hollywood history, a woman who has been nominated for more Academy Awards than any performer who ever lived, sits down for what should be a celebration of her extraordinary career, only to find herself accused of being everything that's wrong with the entertainment industry? What you're about to witness is one of the most shocking confrontations ever captured on daytime television. The moment when Meryl Streep, the woman they call the greatest actress of her generation, was pushed to a breaking point that nobody knew existed. The studio fell completely silent. The audience couldn't believe what they were seeing, and Joy Behar discovered that even the most composed, dignified performers have a limit. Before we dive into this explosive story, make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments because, trust me, you're gonna want to talk about this one. The morning had started with an almost reverential atmosphere at the View Studios. Meryl Streep was coming on the show. Not just any guest, but arguably the most respected actress in the history of American cinema. 21 Academy Award nominations, 3 wins. A career spanning 5 decades that had produced performances so indelible they had become part of the cultural fabric. She was there to promote her latest film, but more than that, her appearance felt like an event. The kind of booking that reminded everyone why they worked in television. Meryl arrived at the studio with characteristic grace, dressed elegantly, but not ostentatiously, her silver hair framing a face that had expressed every human emotion across hundreds of roles. At 75 years old, she still carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove but continued to work because the craft itself was the reward. Her team had assured her this would be a friendly conversation, a victory lap of sorts. What nobody anticipated was that Joy Behar had arrived that morning with very different intentions. The studio lights were warm as Meryl took her seat at the famous table. She greeted each host with genuine warmth, her famous ability to make everyone feel seen on full display. The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted nearly a full minute, and she accepted it with the gracious humility that had always been her trademark. Whoopi Goldberg opened the segment with obvious admiration. Our next guest is simply the greatest. 21 Oscar nominations, 3 wins, and a body of work that defines what it means to be an artist. Please welcome the incomparable Meryl Streep. The applause continued as Meryl settled into her chair with elegant ease. Thank you so much. What a lovely welcome. I've always enjoyed this show, so it's wonderful to finally be here. Sarah Haynes asked about her latest film, and Meryl spoke thoughtfully about the character, about the director's vision, about the collaborative nature of filmmaking that she still found thrilling after 50 years. She talked about the research she had done, the accent work, the physical transformation, all delivered with the intellectual rigor that had made her the actor's actor. You know, people ask me if it ever gets easier, Meryl said, her voice carrying that distinctive quality that somehow conveyed both warmth and intelligence. And the truth is, it doesn't. Every role is a new challenge. Every character is a new puzzle to solve. That's what keeps me coming back. The day it becomes easy is the day I should probably stop. The audience was captivated. This was the Meryl Streep they had come to see, thoughtful and articulate and utterly committed to her craft. For a few minutes, everything felt exactly as it should. Then Joy Behar leaned forward, and something in the room shifted perceptibly. "So, Meryl," Joy began, her voice carrying an edge that made the other hosts exchange nervous glances. "You've had quite a career, all those awards, all that acclaim. But I have to ask you something that I think a lot of regular Americans wonder about. Do you ever feel like you've become a symbol of everything that's wrong with Hollywood? This elite, out-of-touch bubble that lectures the rest of the country about how to think and feel?" The question landed like a thunderclap in the silent studio. The audience shifted uncomfortably. The other hosts looked stunned. Meryl's expression remained composed, but those who knew her well might have noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. "That's quite a question, Joy," Meryl replied, her voice measured and calm. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by lecturing. I've always tried to use whatever platform I have to speak about things I believe in. I didn't realize that was considered out of touch." Joy wasn't backing down. "Oh, come on. The speeches, the political statements, the constant moralizing about values and empathy while you live in a world that most Americans can't even imagine. Don't you think there's something hypocritical about a woman worth hundreds of millions of dollars telling regular people what they should care about?" The accusation hung in the air like poison, Several audience members shifted in their seats. Sunny Hostin looked like she wanted to intervene immediately. Alyssa Farah Griffin's eyes had gone wide with disbelief at the direction the interview was taking. Meryl took a breath before responding, her famous composure still intact, but clearly being tested. Joy, I grew up in a middle-class family in New Jersey. My father was a pharmaceutical executive, my mother was a commercial artist and homemaker. I went to public school. I worked summer jobs. The success I've had came from decades of hard work and, yes, some luck. But I've never forgotten where I came from. Haven't you, though? Joy pressed, her voice rising slightly. Because, from where I sit, you've become the face of this coastal elite culture that looks down on anyone who doesn't share its values. You accept award after award and use those platforms to preach to the rest of us. And then you're surprised when half the country feels like Hollywood doesn't represent them? The critique was sharp and clearly designed to provoke. Meryl's hands, which had been folded gracefully in her lap, tightened almost imperceptibly. I've never preached to anyone, Meryl said, her voice still controlled, but now carrying a firmer edge. I've shared my perspective, as any citizen has the right to do. If speaking about empathy and kindness and the value of the arts is preaching, then I suppose I'm guilty. But I won't apologize for using my voice. Your voice, Joy repeated with a slight smirk. Yes, let's talk about your voice. You've been very vocal about certain issues over the years. But there's one thing I've always wondered about. All those years working in Hollywood, all those projects, all those powerful people you collaborated with. And you never knew? You never saw anything? You never heard the rumors? The implication was unmistakable. The studio went absolutely silent. Meryl's face, which had maintained its composure throughout, flickered with something that looked like genuine pain. If you're asking what I think you're asking, Joy, Meryl said, her voice dropping to something quieter, but somehow more intense. I'll tell you what I've said before. I was not aware of the extent of what was happening. When I learned the truth, I was as horrified as everyone else. But you worked with him for years, Joy pressed, seemingly determined to push this line of questioning, despite the obvious discomfort it was causing. You accepted awards from him. You called him a god at one point. And we're supposed to believe that you, with your famous attention to detail, your legendary preparation, your ability to inhabit any character, somehow missed what was happening right in front of you? The accusation was brutal in its precision. Meryl's composure finally cracked, just slightly, revealing something raw underneath. What are you suggesting, Joy? Meryl's voice had taken on a quality the audience had never heard before, something harder and more dangerous than her usual measured tones. That I knew and said nothing? That I was complicit in something monstrous? Because if that's what you're implying, you should have the courage to say it directly instead of hiding behind insinuation. The challenge seemed to catch Joy off guard for a moment, but she recovered quickly. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking questions that a lot of people have asked. You were the queen of that world, Meryl. You set the tone. You had the power. And a lot of people wonder why that power wasn't used to protect the people who needed protecting. Meryl stood up from her chair, a movement so unexpected that several people in the front row leaned back instinctively. Her full height, combined with a presence honed over 50 years of commanding stages and screens, suddenly filled the studio in a way that made everyone understand why she was considered the greatest of her generation. How dare you! Meryl's voice was quiet, but carried an authority that silenced everything else in the room. How dare you sit there and suggest that I was somehow responsible for the actions of a predator? Do you have any idea how many women have been blamed for not stopping men who were determined to do harm? Do you understand what you're doing right now by perpetuating that narrative? Joy started to respond, but Meryl wasn't finished. I spent my entire career trying to create opportunities for women. I fought for equal pay before it was fashionable. I championed female directors and writers when the industry ignored them. I used my position to advocate for stories about women, by women, for women. And you want to reduce all of that to questions about what I should have known about one man's crimes? The counterattack was devastating. Joy's smirk had completely disappeared, replaced by something that might have been the beginning of regret. I'm just asking the questions that... Joy began. No, Meryl cut her off, her voice rising for the first time. You're not just asking questions. You're making accusations disguised as questions. That's what cowards do when they want to destroy someone, but don't want to take responsibility for it. If you think I'm guilty of something, say it plainly. If you don't, then stop poisoning the air with your implications. The studio was electric with tension. The audience sat frozen, witnessing something they had never expected to see. Meryl Streep, the epitome of grace and composure, pushed to genuine anger by an attack on her integrity. Whoopi attempted to intervene. Maybe we should take this in a different direction. But Meryl held up her hand, a gesture that somehow commanded immediate silence. No, Whoopi, I think this needs to be addressed, because what Joy is doing here today isn't journalism. It's character assassination dressed up as curiosity. She turned back to Joy, her eyes blazing with an intensity that had made her performances so memorable, now directed at something much more personal. You want to talk about being out of touch? Let's talk about being out of touch. I've spent 50 years telling stories about human beings, factory workers and prime ministers, Holocaust survivors and fashion editors, mothers and daughters and lovers and fighters. I've inhabited lives so different from my own that I had to completely surrender my ego to understand them. That's what actors do. We try to understand people who aren't like us. We try to build empathy through story. Her voice was gaining power, fueled by decades of conviction about the value of her art. And you sit there and accuse me of being in a bubble, of not understanding regular people? I've spent more time trying to understand the human condition than most people spend thinking about anything beyond their own immediate concerns. That's not ego. That's the job. That's what art requires. Joy tried to regain her footing. But the speeches, the political statements, the way Hollywood presents itself as morally superior? I have never claimed to be morally superior to anyone, Meryl interrupted, her voice cutting through Joy's attempt like a blade. I have claimed that empathy matters, that art matters, that how we treat each other matters. If stating those basic principles makes me an elitist, then the word has lost all meaning. She paused, and when she continued, her voice had dropped to something more personal, more vulnerable. Do you know what it cost me to speak out about the things I believed in? Do you have any idea the hate mail, the death threats, the people who decided I was their enemy because I dared to express an opinion? I didn't do it because it was easy or popular. I did it because I believed it was right. And I will not stand here and be lectured about courage by someone who has never had to risk anything for their beliefs. The accusation was pointed and precise. Joy's face had gone red, and she was clearly struggling to formulate a response. I take risks every day on this show, Joy said, but her voice lacked conviction. Do you? Meryl's laugh was short and sharp. What risk? That some people might disagree with you? That you might get some angry tweets? That's not risk. Risk is standing up at the Golden Globes knowing that half the country will hate you for it, but doing it anyway because some things need to be said. Risk is putting your career on the line to advocate for people who don't have a voice. What exactly have you risked, Joy? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Joy seemed genuinely at a loss for words, a rare state for someone whose job was to have opinions about everything. I've spent my career asking difficult questions, Joy finally managed. Difficult questions? Meryl shook her head slowly. A difficult question would be asking me about the challenges facing women in the industry and what we can do about them. A difficult question would be exploring how storytelling can build bridges between people who don't understand each other. A difficult question would be examining why our culture is so divided and what role art might play in healing those divisions. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze fixed on Joy with laser precision. What you've been doing isn't asking difficult questions. It's throwing bombs and calling it journalism. It's taking cheap shots at someone's integrity because controversy generates attention. It's exactly the kind of destructive discourse that's tearing this country apart. Whoopi tried once more to redirect. Perhaps we could talk about the film. In a moment, Whoopi, Meryl said, her voice softer now, but still carrying authority. I want to finish this because I think it's important. She turned to address the audience directly, and the camera caught the full weight of her presence, the same presence that had made her a star 50 years ago, and had only deepened with time. I know that some people see me as a symbol of something they don't like, Hollywood liberalism, elite culture, whatever label they want to apply, and I can't control how people see me, but I can tell you who I actually am. Her voice carried the emotional depth that had made her performances so powerful. I'm someone who fell in love with acting when I was 12 years old and never fell out of love with it. I'm someone who has tried, imperfectly but sincerely, to use whatever gifts I was given to illuminate the human experience. I'm someone who believes that stories have the power to change minds and open hearts. And I'm someone who will not be bullied into silence by people who have decided that my success makes me the enemy. The audience began to applaud, softly at first, then building to something substantial. I've been in this business for 50 years, Meryl continued over the applause. I've seen fads come and go. I've watched the culture shift and change and shift again. I've been declared relevant and relevant again more times than I can count. And through all of it, I've kept working. Not because I needed the money or the awards or the recognition. Because the work itself matters. Because telling stories matters. Because trying to understand each other matters. She turned back to Joy, one final time. You came at me today with accusations and implications designed to tear me down. And maybe you'll succeed. Maybe tomorrow's headlines will be about Meryl Streep losing her temper on The View. Maybe that's the story people will remember. But I want you to know something, Joy. I've been knocked down before, by people much more powerful than you, and I'm still here. I'm still working. I'm still fighting for the things I believe in. And nothing you say today is going to change that. She gathered her things with quiet dignity, her movements deliberate and controlled. I came here to talk about a film I'm proud of, made by people I admire, telling a story I think matters. Instead, I've spent 15 minutes defending my character against accusations that don't deserve the dignity of a response. That's 15 minutes I'll never get back, and 15 minutes your viewers will never get back. I hope it was worth it to you. She paused at the edge of the stage and turned back, her expression unreadable. Actually, I hope it wasn't. I hope that someday you look back on this interview and feel something like regret. Not for asking hard questions, which is your job, but for asking cruel questions, which is a choice. There's a difference, Joy. I hope someday you learn what it is. With that, Meryl Streep walked off the stage with the same grace that had defined her entire career. The audience sat in stunned silence for a moment, then erupted into applause that seemed to shake the walls. The other hosts looked at Joy with expressions ranging from disbelief to disappointment, and Joy Behar sat alone at the table, looking like someone who had just learned a very difficult lesson about the difference between provocation and journalism. What had started as a promotional interview had become something far more significant. A declaration of values, a defense of art, a reminder that even the most gracious people have limits, and that crossing those limits has consequences. And as the studio fell into reflective silence, one thing was absolutely clear. The greatest actress of her generation had given one more unforgettable performance. Not on a movie screen this time, but in defense of everything she had spent her life believing in. The aftermath of that interview would dominate entertainment news for weeks. Clips of Meryl's speech about empathy and art would be shared millions of times across social media platforms. Think pieces would be written about the state of celebrity interviews and whether provocation had replaced genuine journalism. And somewhere in all of that noise, a conversation would begin about what we ask of our artists and whether we have the right to demand they answer for sins they didn't commit. But in that moment, as Meryl Streep walked out of the studio, with her head held high and her dignity intact, none of the future coverage mattered. What mattered was that a woman who had dedicated her entire life to understanding the human condition had been forced to defend her basic humanity on live television. What mattered was that she had done so with the same grace, intelligence, and passion that had defined every performance she had ever given. And what mattered most of all was the message she had left behind, that empathy is not weakness, that art is not frivolous, that speaking up for what you believe in is not elitism. These were not political statements. They were human ones. And they came from someone who had spent 50 years proving that the deepest truths are often found not in speeches or interviews, but in the simple act of trying to understand another person's experience. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Was Joy Behar out of line, or was she just doing her job? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.